Welcome to Brain Wellness, the podcast. I'm your host, Mandy NP. Each episode will bring you a new topic or interview related to brain health and wellness as part of my mission to help you on the path to a healthier, happier brain. So, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Brain Wellness, the podcast. Today, my guest is the man, the myth, the legend, my one and only, my husband, Mr. Don Dickey. Don's life reminds me of a Dos Equis commercial. He's the most interesting man you'll ever meet. He's been a firefighter, rodeo cowboy, heavy equipment operator, and owned his own construction company, among many other roles, leading to his current production supervisor role, where he recently was recognized as a top manager. We have been together for 2.5 years, going on 5 months of marriage. But of all of his roles, little did he realize that one of his most demanding that he would hold would be supporting me after the accident. When the kids took over the mic a few weeks ago, he looked at me and said, when do I get to do one? So here we are. Thanks for being on today with me, babe.
You're welcome.
So first off, I always have lots of questions for people, but things that we kind of talked about beforehand. When did you first notice or realize that something wasn't right with me?
Honestly, it took a while. So for the first couple of months, I had a tendency to be like, why aren't you back to work? How come you're not going back to work? I talked to my best friend and was like, I don't understand this. This is, I was at work the next day after the accident. So there was for me, it was a lot of questions. Like I just didn't understand. And then I'd say somewhere around a month and a half, 2 months. I don't remember what we were doing exactly, but something happened and I literally saw a physical feature change in your body and in your face. And you just kind of got this blank, dead stare. And you just kind of looked like you were just out, like you checked out the entire mentally, physically, your features, everything was just checked out. And I think that was when I really realized there was something more to this than just you not wanting to work. And that was hard for me because I'd never seen you in that type of a role. And I've never had to deal with someone that had that something like that happen. So yeah.
And it's good to be on the show here like this so we can get the couple's perspective and the significant other perspective, because I knew what I was going through, but not being the one experiencing the symptoms, I can totally see how it was difficult to really identify what was going on, because it wasn't really obvious. And that's part of the problem with brain injuries, is that it's not necessarily a visible disability. It's not something that people can easily identify. And I wasn't identifying when I had the symptoms. You noticed it before I did when I would hit that wall.
Yeah.
So it actually became very helpful for me because you were able to notice when I was getting to the point where I needed to stop whatever activity that we were doing, because I wasn't able to identify that.
Yeah, I'd start, these things would be out somewhere and I'd kind of notice you starting to fade into that. And I was able to kind of call it out. And then I started doing, of course, protective husband. I'm the big bad guy. I'm going to take care of my wife and my family. And I would call it out and be like, hey, let's just call it a night. Let's head out, we're time. And it's hard because there was a lot of times during that time frame we didn't see a lot of our friends or family. So when we were around them, we wanted to stay as long as we could, but there were just some days we just couldn't. It wasn't healthy for you. So.
So you kind of explained a little bit about what some of those thoughts were initially. Anything you want to add on to that before we move forward?
The biggest thing I think is during that time frame, once I noticed the changes, the biggest thing there is, I'm a masculine guy. I don't, like to show my emotions as much as most people would think. But the hard part for me would be while I was at work, if I'd stay late or something, I was usually researching my own, trying to figure out how to be supportive or what to look at, what to look for. How could we get you back to work? I think my problem was from the outside looking in, I was always trying to figure out how to get you back to work rather than how to get you healthy, which was hard because of our financial situation and stuff like that. And I don't think that shifted in my mindset until I noticed probably, right into that 4 to 5 month mark. I was really realizing that I was putting a lot of pressure on you as my wife to get back to work rather than putting pressure on myself or our kids or our healthcare providers to try and actually get you the help you needed. So I really think there was a um, for people that suffer from this type of stuff, I think they need to get to that mindset faster. And instead of thinking about, what's the impact of our home, what is the impact of our finances, as much as that's important, the most important part is when you're going that way and you're approaching it from the finance or the family part, or I just that pressure and that extra stuff is time that is better spent trying to figure out, make sure that your spouse is okay, or that your partner or your person or whoever that may be, or whatever that relationship may be, family member, husband, mother, wife, father, child, is really getting the help earlier and recognizing it earlier rather than just trying to be like, oh, well, it didn't happen to me. And then realizing after the fact that it did happen. And there's a lot more behind it than what came up.
I think that's a sentiment that we actually shared, and I didn't know we did. But I put a lot of pressure on myself too to get back to work, and I know I was adding a lot of stress. Initially, early on, I thought it was just going to be a couple of days before I was off work, so I had no idea that it was going to go on as long as it has. And I kept just trying to figure out, what can I do to get back to work? What can I do to get back to work? And I didn't even know at first like what all my symptoms were, because we needed to peel back layers. So I was having such a bad headache all the time that I didn't realize how much trouble I was having thinking. I didn't realize how much trouble I was having with my eyes, because I thought it was all just my headache. So when that headache actually started feeling better, that's when I really could identify that I still wasn't thinking very well, even after the headache being gone. And oh crap, I can't go back to work. So that was a hard realization for me too.
Yeah,
Um,
continues to be.
yeah, yeah. So we just hit the 9 month mark, and that's every month that goes by. It's just harder and harder to. I've put more stress on myself too. I know, but I know along the way we had some changes with our relationship as a couple. Um, how I guess how quickly did you notice, or what were some of the things that you noticed as a couple that we had issues with?
Mm. I didn't notice a whole lot in the beginning, but a lot of that is just, you're kind of living in denial from like, you're just trying to go on like it's, well, nothing's going to change and nothing has changed. It's going to be, um, everything's going to be okay. And we're just going to go about this like nothing ever happened. Um, I'm somebody who doesn't let stress doesn't show for me very, because I grew up in a very high stress world. I've always had jobs that were very high stress and high strung, a lot of performance based. So I deal with stress differently than most people. It doesn't show until it gets to a certain point. Once it gets to that point, then it becomes very obvious that there's something going on. And that's when it becomes obvious to people behind me. At that point, it's become very unhealthy. Um, so I think it's when it reached that point is when I realized that that's when things started to change with us. That's when, I noticed with you, which we already knew, about that 3, 4, you would get to that point where you hit your wall. And then as you progressed in your treatment and you started to do a little bit better, um, you would put more pressure on yourself to do more. And then when you couldn't, or you hit a wall that was even harder than the wall you used to hit before, it would cause more frustration. And then that frustration, at that point, you didn't have control over where or how that frustration presented itself to everyone in our family, whether it's the kids, myself. And I tried to buffer that a lot. As a dad, you don't want the kids to yell at for something they didn't do wrong, or you don't like it. I don't like getting yelled at for something I didn't do, so I certainly don't want the kids to have to deal with that. So there's a lot of stuff that just kind of pushed you over the edge a lot. So at that point, you know, I think I'm a fairly supportive husband. I like to think I am. Um, but at the same time, I think that's where it started to really show is, at some point it went from our, when we started dating all the way into our marriage, we were always just a happy go lucky. We had everything just naturally ebbed and flowed. There was no resistance on either one of our fronts. There was no changes. And I think that's where the biggest change occurred, is because after that it became more of a struggle to hit that natural. We don't hit that natural flow as much as we used to. So it's like, all right, I need to actively think now about what I'm saying, actively think about what I'm doing. And things that used to be no big deal before are huge deals now. Like, that annoys the hell out of me. Why do you? And then it's just like, okay, I haven't done anything different. What the hell? Excuse my language.
Yeah, because that was
Um,
always one of our favorite things about each other, is that we didn't get mad
yeah,
at things. And I always loved that. So getting to the point where I have in the last however many months, I get mad at myself because I get mad at you or get mad at the kids on things that would never have upset me before.
yeah,
And I don't know how not to get upset. So, and we've talked about this a lot too, that I don't feel like myself even
yeah,
still. And I know that that's caused problems because I'm not the same kind of just happy, jovial person that I used to be. And gosh, even when the kids took over the mic a few weeks ago and Hayden said I used to be kind, that hit me hard because I'm like, oh crap, I'm not. Does he not think I'm kind anymore? So it's, and that's where I notice it a lot.
yeah.
It's just the anger and frustration that didn't used to be there.
Yeah, when I think about that, the statement where he said that, I don't know. I mean, I think it came more from not so much kind, but more of we used to be the more fun. Like, we didn't take life so serious, whereas
Mhm.
now everything is more serious. I mean, it's taking its toll. I mean, 9 months, physically, mentally, emotionally, and then during that time frame, you had to deal with more than just that. You had your foot started hacking up, and you ended up with a surgery on your foot that was supposed to be just quick, more run and done. We figured, you know what, let's get it done and taken care of while you're already out of work, and that way when you go back to work right away. And then that turned into a nightmare where the surgeon just did a horrible job, and your pain and everything. And I think we just hit so many things going on, and then along comes the natural of events of everything else in our life. I think things just continued to pile on, and that was hard. Um, I mean, anybody would have changed their reactions to some of that stuff, and you would be more serious about it rather than more jovial. And the hope is in prayers, or that, as God helps us get through this stuff and in our relationship and in our marriage and this whole situation with the TBI, that it gets back to that point. So.
Mhm. Let's hope. Yeah. Any other changes that you noticed moving forward, or is that kind of the big one?
There's the depression that came along with it, which made it hard for me. It's trying to get you positive and pull someone out. I know, because I dealt with depression early in my life, and some stuff that, when you're depressed, you don't want someone to pull you out of it. You just want to be left alone. Like, just let me figure it out on my own. Just leave me be. Um, so trying to be there and just be supportive and just let you know that I'm there. I'm here. Sometimes that's all I needed to do, which actually worked probably the best. Was just, I'm not going anywhere. I think that was probably during that time frame that you started. I think you really questioned a lot, which, you know, why do you still want to marry me? Are you sure you still want to be married? Why do you want to be here? Because we were only engaged at that point. We got engaged a week before the accident, and it was almost more like you were trying to push me away. Like, you didn't deal. A lot of times you said flat out, you didn't. This isn't what you um, bargained for. This isn't what you signed up for. And I'm like, no, actually, I think it's the reverse. It's exactly what I signed up for. That's what marriage is. It's through sickness and health, and I take that very seriously. So it's through the good and bad, and we've definitely had to deal with both. More good than bad. When I look at it, we've been together for 2.5 years, and out of the 2.5 years, I'm looking at 9 months worth of slowly transgressing down into the bad. It's not a bad track record. So.
Yeah, that question crossed my mind several times, and I can't say that I haven't had the thought of whether or not you have regretted marrying me since all my changes with the accident, because I'm not as pleasant as I used to be, and we've talked about that on the show here, so that's not a surprise to anyone either. But
For a second.
Not for a second that you questioned it.
Nope, not for a second. I never questioned it. There's with any marriage, everyone always has those moments where they're like, "Oh God, what did I get into?" Um, but it never questioned it because of the accident or the brain injury. That's never not a. That's not even a thing. I wouldn't take this ring off for the life of me. I wouldn't change our life, even though we're going through hard times now. I wouldn't change it for the world.
Any other changes in our family we should talk about?
Well, during that time, my daughter moved in with us, and well, that's just drama. Let's be honest, it's a 14-year-old girl. It's been
15 now.
nothing but a lot of stress. Going from a 50-50 custody with both of our kids to having a full-time child in the house right after the accident, because that happened in July. And so right as we started to really get into the pinnacle of you having these thresholds, we add in that new dynamic, and it was tough. I think that added a whole lot of stress into. So
Yeah, we have not had our a shortage of stress in the last 9 months. Goodness, I don't think anybody should have to go through this much. Um, but I'm glad that we've been able to kind of help each other with it. I know once I really identified that I was having issues with my own mental health and opened up to you, I think that helped a lot, because we both were able to share a lot of feelings that we had at that time, which I think we were both trying to keep them from the other person so that we didn't add more stress on each other.
Yeah.
I know that's why I was keeping mine a lot, because I didn't want to put more stress on you. But I think once that happened, I felt like we connected even more at that point, even though there was a lot of stress everywhere else. But
There is.
yeah.
That's part of it. I mean, you do it together. I mean, that's the hard part. Remembering that you're not in it alone is, that's probably the toughest thing, is to recognize, hey, from a man's perspective and a father and a husband, you want to be the pillar of strength for your family. You want to make sure everyone just sees as much normalcy as possible. But it's just not the reality. And you have to be able to show that and talk to the people that are in the family and your friends, and rely on those people who are there for you to really come up alongside you, both in your faith and your fellowship with them, and just friends. I mean, sometimes it's just going to get a cup of coffee and having someone to talk to. It's like quick 10-15 minute, you know, like a dynamic that I've noticed is different, before, like when you used to go to work, you had that interaction with other adults, you had that thing, and then I would come home, and like I said, I'm up, I work, and I'm in school, and I'm in college, and I'm getting my degrees, and I'm, trying to get all this stuff buttoned up, before, where that wasn't an issue. We knew it was coming. Um, Spending that time in school and stuff, it went from, that's okay, I'm okay with that time, and only getting 2 hours a night, to crap, I only get 2 hours a night. That it requires a lot more effort in the relationship, so that it changes that dynamic and how to figure out where to go and where to navigate that is huge. It's, how do I put something off tonight and then tomorrow night, and when can I make time to make that all back up, just to make sure my wife's mental state stays right, or just to make sure that both of our mental states stay right. And then try to figure out the dynamic of, well, now their kids are feeling neglected because I'm never around, and they only see mom. Because if I'm not at work, or I'm not dealing with any of that stuff, then I'm not with the family, and that makes it hard. So
Yeah, and I've always said with all of that I feel like I've gotten really needy. Yeah, because I did used to have a whole lot more adult interaction when I went to work, and then I would come home and we could all be part of the family. But not going to work, my only adult interaction for the most part is when I go to my therapy appointments or doctor appointments, and it's a brief thing. I've tried to keep up some, at least going for lunch or coffee or something with some of my girlfriends, but they work too, so it's been tough to really kind of keep that social aspect of it up. And so yeah, when I have a little bit of time with you, I try to get whatever I can with that. And I know that puts more stress on you too, because I do seem kind of needy sometimes.
I don't know that it's needy. It's just, it's, you sit at home all day, you don't get a whole lot of adult interaction or interaction with anyone. And then there's the times where I'm around and oh, excuse me. Where when I come home, sometimes I just want to go brain dead. Like my job is very high stress and very fast paced, and I'm making decisions on the fly. Um, it's very similar to healthcare that way. And dealing with that stuff, when I come home, I just need to shut off for an hour or two, and before I have to turn it back on. And I don't get that except for maybe once a week if I'm lucky. Whereas before, I could get it for an hour a night, and that adds to that dynamic.
Mhm. And so one thing that I always talked to my patients about when I would see patients before was that it's anytime you have a spouse that then goes into kind of caregiver mode, which you've essentially been, even though I'm able to take care of myself, but just having to do more for the family. When you have a spouse that goes into caregiver mode, it changes things with your intimate relationship. So without getting into too many details, um, what can you add on that thought?
The biggest part for me is, I think you and I had fairly similar slash different ideas on what that means. Like to me, intimacy is different than just sex. So intimacy is everything in between from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed. It's me waking up and spending 5 minutes just snuggling and holding my wife. It's 10 minutes walking in the door and just giving her a kiss as soon as I walk in the door versus seeing anyone or paying any attention to anyone else. It's when she's doing dishes, walking up behind her and putting my arms around her, just tell her I'm loving her and kissing her neck. It can be flirting, whistling at her, whatever it may be, just to let her know that I'm thinking about her. I'm shooting her a text in the middle of the day. That type of stuff is intimacy to me. Whereas yours is more the physical, intimate part of the relationship, the actual sex and the intimacy part. So understanding those two differences between us is probably the biggest thing. But then recognizing that and this is what I still working on because I have no idea how to navigate this part of it. Still struggling with it a little bit is when I'm done at the end of my day, I am exhausted mentally, physically, emotionally. I had back surgery. I've had stuff that I've dealt with in the past that my body is just beat. It's old. Is the best way to put it. I'm a 40-year-old man in an 80-year-old man's body. So when I get up in the morning, it takes a lot to get up and moving sometimes. And then when I come home, the last thing I want to do is move around and frolic. And sometimes I just want to relax. But I have to make sure that I take into account your needs. And the needs of the marriage as a whole, not just mine and what I want. It's about what we do as a couple. And sometimes I find that very hard for me. So.
And the other part of that too, when we were talking about or prepping for the show, is that when I do get frustrated, angry, when we get more and more arguments, it's then difficult to even want that intimacy. So that's a whole nother aspect that kind of gets thrown in there. And I know I like to share things on the show that may make you a little bit more worried, but or uncomfortable, I guess. But it's the uncomfortable things, sharing those, that helps other people, because I've got a couple other good friends right now that are going through similar journeys, and every time I've talked about something on the show, they're like, "Oh, heck, I have that problem too." So it's knowing that this is not a problem that just us is experiencing right now.
It's a real world experience.
Yeah. So it's definitely something that to keep in mind, to think about, and just another aspect that we got to work through. So,
and I think it's important for everyone to realize that, especially for the caregiver mode, is the person going through it doesn't see the little wins. They don't see the small gains. And I think that's where, like, whether it's journaling or and I was thinking about this the other day, like maybe we put a board on the wall or something where it shows, I'm a production supervisor. We deal with charts, graphs, statistics and ratios. So maybe that stuff needs to go up on the wall. It's so that you can visualize it, because sometimes you can't see the physical, sometimes you can't see the mental. It's not a giant change, it's just a little change, but that little change is huge when you're going through this stuff. And being able to point those wins out and then actually claiming those victories is probably really hard for the person going through it. So constantly reminding the person that has the injury and being the supportive partner to constantly call out those wins and be like, yeah, but you remember before you could only do this for like 4 hours and then you were wiped out for the rest of the, it took you 2 days to recover. Now you're at, you can go 6 hours. Now you can go 8 hours. Now you're going 3 days before you hit that giant wall. Trying to call those things out, and then, well, before you couldn't recognize this. Now when you're hitting your wall. It's learning to put those victories out there, to visually see it is probably one of the biggest things from my perspective, because that's how you learned how to cultivate and recognize, what, I'm hitting my wall. And then when you take your sessions away, I mean, there's days now where you'll be fine for like a week and you don't have any, or for 3 or 4 days you don't hit that wall. And then there's the days where you hit it right away, and it's short bursts. So you can go for 4 hours. Now I need a 20-minute reprieve. Now I can go another 4 hours, but I need another 20-minute reprieve. So you have those random patterns, and being able to recognize when and how that is also one of those things. It's got to be pointed out and shown. And when you see it, that's when you're like, oh yeah, there is. And then that's when I can actually see physical changes when you get happy about how you've noticed some of that stuff. So
Yeah, I know I haven't been great about that. I think my bigger problem with it is that even though I have had wins, it's not the big wins that I need to get me back to work. So physically wise, I graduated from physical therapy last week, which was really exciting for that purpose. But I can't remember if it was you or who I told. Still can't remember things very well. That's part of the problem.
Yep.
But I told somebody that it was kind of a double-edged sword, because
You told the therapist that and me.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, I told two people. But it was kind of a double-edged sword, because I was done with physical therapy, but at the same time, my physical symptoms for the most part are gone. So it's now really not anything that anybody can see. It's really just I didn't say in my head, but physically it's in my head, because my brain just isn't working. So it's like that cognitive piece that I really need to get back. And also, like, kind of getting back to what we talked about earlier, I kind of joked with my physical therapist. I'm like, well, you're my friend now. And now I'm giving up on my friends, essentially, because I don't get to see you every week. So that was hard on that too. But at the same token, I graduated from PT. So physically wise, I've been able to work out for 6 days now, because I can actually, my balance is so much better that I can do that part. So that feels great. It feels great to be able to do something that I did before that made me feel like I am who I am. So that's a big win. I'll take that.
I agree.
That's a big win. Is there anything that you think, knowing now, like hindsight is always 20/20, is there anything you wish we would have done differently in the last 6 months, 9 months?
The biggest thing I think is, recognizing that it was more serious. We went to the emergency room right after the accident. And there was, getting the proper care at the emergency room is probably the biggest thing for as I'm thinking of auto accidents. Former firefighter, former paramedic, you always recommend to someone, you should always get seen. You should always go and get looked at, even if you feel fine. You always give that advice, but you don't really take it to heart, and, even when it's someone you care about, oh, you get hurt. Oh, let me take you, let me help you, let me nurture you. But from that scenario, it was, we went to the emergency room, but, from the get-go, I'm like, what is taking so long? Like, we came in an ambulance, and then we sat in the emergency, like we waited to even be triaged for like 2 hours. It was ridiculous. From that perspective, I wish I had been I was probably clearly a little, I had my bell rung a little bit, but I was still thinking, based off training, and my instincts kicked in at that point. And what would I do in this normal scenario if I were a firefighter being called this? And that's what I focused on. So I was able to maintain most of my cognitive function, thinking and making sure everyone was okay. Scene assessment, I did all of that stuff right. What I didn't do right, and what I wish I'd done, is making sure that the post care from the ambulance to the hospital, to the clinics, to the doctor's appointments afters. I wish I'd have followed up a little bit better. Um, you were complaining about headaches. I was kind of just listening and just going along with, rather than managing the care, rather than managing our life. And I think if I'd have been a little more cognitive, more not who I am, I guess, this is so to speak. Well, it'll be fine. You get injured, you just get up and brush it off and go back to work. That's where I think men and women are a little different. But I think if I'd have been thinking a little more clearly on it, I would have gone after and gotten you or more care. Like within that first week, for sure. Like, okay, we didn't get proper care. You didn't do MRIs. They didn't do any of that stuff right after the accident. And as severe as the accident was, I should have been pushing for that. With my training and my knowledge, I should have known better. And knowing that as that stuff continued to progress and you were complaining about it, I should have recognized it. I think with your healthcare experience, same thing. We thought you would have known about it. You know your body better than anyone else, but there was damage and there was impact, and it wasn't functioning properly. So I think recognizing that getting that care initially is the most important part. Like, okay, yeah, I got hurt, but and then once they recognize, oh yeah, you had a concussion. Okay, well, how severe is that concussion? Look into that. I don't think people recognize that it was a TBI until we were like a month and a half in. That was like, okay, I just have headaches and I'm getting migraines and I'm dizzy. But they didn't really dive in until we really started being like, okay, it's like 3 months in and you're not getting better. Then we went and looked at it. We should have, within that first week, okay, I can understand it, but we should have really hit it after that second week. We should have been in there hammering the doctors, like, what's wrong? So I think that's my biggest thing, is get the care immediately after. Find it earlier. Don't wait to get the results, because then it's going to be a longer recovery. And it could have been so much worse. There could have been. I think about that stuff all the time. I think about, and that's part of this too. There's the guilt that comes along with this. I ran the red light. She took the impact. I didn't. There's a lot of that stuff that has to be worked out. And when you go through this, especially if it's a scenario like we had, maybe it's only the one person driving the vehicle and they get injured and it's not their fault, or maybe it is their fault. Even if it's just the one, but especially if there's the spouse in a situation like this where, I deal with a lot of guilt here. Like my wife's career and everything she's worked for her whole life, that was the way she provided for her family before she ever met me, is at jeopardy. It's at risk, that she may never do that again. And it's because of me that happened. There's a lot of guilt and a lot of hurt that you have to work through to get past that. And it's not just something you can brush off to the side. And there's a lot of conversation that has to happen between your spouse, your partner, or family member, whoever it may be, that has to happen. And there's a lot of self-reflection that has to occur as well. So I'd say the biggest thing is get the help earlier, mental, physical, emotional, all of it. Seek that help out. Don't just wait.
Yeah, because my biggest problem being the healthcare provider, I didn't have access to my medical knowledge, and I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know all the symptoms that I had. I didn't realize what was going on. So I couldn't advocate for myself very well. And I couldn't even explain to you very well what was going on, because I wasn't recognizing it. I didn't even, when I have a friend who's a neurologist, and that's who I called right away. And I didn't even realize before I saw him that I was having double vision or that I had balance issues. It wasn't until he tested me that he's like, "Oh, did you know you had this?" I'm like, "Nope, I didn't realize that." So I didn't know what all issues I was dealing with. Therefore, I didn't know when to ask for help, because I've always been such an independent person. So that came back to bite me a little bit, because I didn't know that I needed help until, in some cases, it was almost too late. And that caused some issues with us then too. But that guilt part has been hard on me. And that's one thing, that part of the reason why I didn't want to, when I did finally realize what was going on with myself, I was hesitant to tell you, because I didn't want to put more on you, because you did feel so guilty already. Regardless of how many times I say accidents happen, and you were not the only one at fault of that. Clearly the other driver was definitely distracted as well.
Yeah.
So there's that. There's so many things I think we could probably still talk about, but
Oh, yeah.
I think we're kind of getting to the end of the time frame. Yeah, we should probably try to wrap it up. Anything else that you wanted to add or make sure to talk about from the spouse's perspective?
Well, the biggest thing is patience, which is the hardest thing for most people. Um, don't assume. Um, my grandmother always taught me, or ASS, you and me. You assume makes an ass out of you and me. And excuse my language, it's a podcast, but I'm just being honest and real, which is all I know how to be. But it's you need to be there for your partner. Don't one of the things I could have done differently was be around more. Which is what she told me all the time. Like, I need you for me, and I'm like, I'm the only one supporting our family right now, so I can't miss work. And there was a lot of that. Like, this is my, and what I realized I was doing there a little bit, was using it as my escape to not have to deal with some of the stuff. Like, I do recognize that. And that's hard. Like, I love my job. I love what I do. I want to be there. And unfortunately, I'm in an industry that very few people in the world deal with. And so I have to be at my job. My department relied on me. I'm one of the few supervisors in the country or the world that deals with what I deal with. And so I put that pressure. I've always been, my work has always been number one. It's the only way I've ever provided for my family. It's the only way I've ever provided for me. It's been my most constant in my life. This is my second marriage. And so I was like, well, if she wants to leave me because I'm trying to provide for the family, so be it, But what you have to realize is you got to be there for your spouse. That is more important than anything else. And she told me numerous times, like, I need you here for me. And I was like, well, I'm being here for you, but this is what being here for you means. And really take the time to be patient, to listen, to understand. I do that at my job every day, but for whatever reason, I didn't make that connection here at home. And it was, listen, understand what the other person's trying to tell you. Because in her defense, she didn't know what she was trying to tell me. So I was just taking the words that she was saying to me, like, I get that, but I was trying to think about it from a different perspective. So always put yourself in the other shoes, listen to understand, don't listen to reply, and then just be there for each other. The patience is going to be the biggest thing that gets tried. We've had a couple of nail biter blowouts since the accident, whereas before, in the first 2 years of our relationship, we never fought, not a single time. There was not a single argument we'd ever had. It just didn't happen. Everything was just too naturally flowing. And since then there's been a couple of blowouts, and that's just, it's a patience thing. It's sit down, listen, breathe. Don't be afraid to say, you know what, this needs to be revisited. I need 10 minutes. I need an hour. I need a day to just stop the talk, stop the conversation. Don't move forward. We will revisit this. And the key there is, don't just say that and walk away. Revisit the conversation. It's a tough conversation to have when you're in the heat of the moment. It's definitely tough to go back to it after the fact when you've calmed down, but don't not go back to it, because that'll cause even more. That stress just builds.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Mm-hmm. Thanks for being here today.
You're welcome.
Every day.
Well, as long as you'll have me.
Thanks for listening, guys. See you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Brain Wellness, the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to subscribe, like, and share this with others to help me continue on with my mission to help people live healthier, happier lives. Go to www.brainwellnesssolutions.com to see what I'm up to and get links to all the social medias there. See you next time.